You might recall that this past Wednesday was the 11th of November, Remembrance Day for 2020. On this day, every year, we have an opportunity to reflect on the conflicts of the past and to remember the sacrifices of those who have secured our freedom, at least in this place. And so on the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m, or in our church office about 11:03 a.m, we had a moment of silence and reflection for Remembrance Day. And in the days that followed, I was reflecting a little bit on World War II and recalled a speech in the movie Pearl Harbor. You might remember the movie. The speech was by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, FDR orders a bombing raid on Tokyo. But all the Joint Chiefs and military leaders that surrounded him at the time said, it can't be done. It's too big. We're too far away. It can't be done. But FDR was resolute and he responded, don't tell me it can't be done. And at least in the movie, I don't know whether it happened in real life, but FDR got out of his wheelchair that he was in because of polio and began to walk at least a few steps. Don't tell me it can't be done. He challenged the normal way of doing things and encouraged thinking outside the box. And a solution was discovered, the so-called Doolittle raid, launching B-25 bombers off aircraft carriers. That had never been done before. It had never been done before. But don't tell me it can't be done, said FDR. And although it was just one mission, in the context of a large, wide conflict, it boosted the morale of the Allies because the seemingly impossible can be done. Now, many of us have big visions and big dreams for our life, and sometimes we're told by others that you're dreaming too big. It can't be done. It can't be done. Maybe you've heard that by parents or teachers or friends even. We also have a big dream and vision for our church. I'm hoping you know what it is. We long to see all people in multicultural Western Sydney and beyond renewed through the love of Jesus Christ. That is a big vision for all people. Maybe it's too big because we haven't seen the reality of that vision, at least in our experience just yet. Maybe we're dreaming too big. Maybe we should just water down our vision or change what we do because it can't be done. Or so we might be told. Well, I believe God is saying to us all today, and we're going to see it in Acts 16, a little bit like FDR. God is saying to us today, don't tell me it can't be done. It can be done. The big idea for today is that the vision for the many starts with a mission to the one. You don't remember anything else today, remember that. The vision for the many starts with a mission to the one. We're in Acts 16, and Acts 16 recounts Paul's second missionary journey. We saw last week at the end of chapter 15 that the mission teams have multiplied. Paul and Barnabas have multiplied. Barnabas goes off to Cyprus with John Mark, and Paul joins with Silas, and they head off to Turkey, and we're going to see today, head into mainland Europe for the very first time. Now, we didn't read it, but in verse 6 to 7 of chapter 16, the mission begins almost with a failure, like it can't be done. We're told that they were prevented by the Holy Spirit from speaking the message in Asia. That's where they thought God wanted them to go. But they were prevented from speaking the message in Asia. And then when they tried to go into Bithynia, the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. They're strange words to hear. And if I were Paul, I would be asking some serious questions of God. God, what are you doing? We're on this mission for you and your kingdom. We've got this big vision for the nations to hear Jesus, and you're stopping us from doing it. Is it because it can't be done? Is it because we can't do it? what's going on, Lord? They're the questions that I would be asking. But sometimes our plans are not always God's plans. We need to remember that, both in life and in ministry. And we need to be open to adjusting our plans to fit into God's plans. And God certainly had a plan, and he opened the mind of the apostles to see it. In verse 8, we see. So bypassing Mysia, they came down to Troas. During the night, a vision appeared to Paul. A Macedonian man was standing and pleading with him, "Cross over to Macedonia and help us." After he had seen the vision, we immediately made efforts to set out for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to evangelize them. Now, some of you may have noticed just in those verses a shift from the third person, they did this, to the first person, we did this. Because it's likely that Luke, the author of the book of Acts, has now joined the mission team himself and is giving his first-hand eyewitness account of the missionary journeys. And so these missionaries arrive on mainland Europe, Macedonia, for the very first time, in search of what I'm calling the Masso man, the Macedonian man of Paul's vision. But what happens in Macedonia is again a reminder that God often works in ways that we don't expect. And that's okay. So let's have a look at the Masso mission. Having arrived in Philippi, which we're told is a leading city in Macedonia, no doubt the missionary team have done what they've always done in terms of their strategy. They would try and find a local synagogue and engage in conversation with the men there and see what response that they get before turning to the Gentiles. But they don't find a synagogue in Philippi. So we're told that they head down to the river, where they heard that there was a place of prayer. But on arrival, they do not find the Masso man of Paul's vision. Instead, they find an Asian woman, which is not what they were expecting. An Asian woman named Lydia, who is a dealer, we're told, in purple cloth, which is an expensive material. And so we're meant to read into that this Asian woman, Lydia, is a wealthy businesswoman. Paul had a vision of the Masso man, and here she is not what he was expecting. And yet she happens to be what we're told is a God-fearer. She believes in the God of the Bible. She just hasn't heard of Jesus yet. And we're told those majestic words in verse 14, that the Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was spoken by Paul. The Lord opened her heart. Just like the Lord opened the mind of the apostles to something new, the Lord opened the heart of Lydia to hear the good news of Jesus. And she becomes a follower of Jesus. The first individual to land Europe. The second person to be impacted by the Masso mission was probably another person they didn't expect, and that is an exploited slave. This exploited slave girl. In verse 16 to 18, we're told that this little girl was possessed by an evil spirit, which gave her the ability to tell the future, be a bit of a fortune teller. And she was exploited then by her owners because she made them very wealthy. And she was their slave. She made them wealthy, but she had no freedom herself. And whenever Paul would walk around Philippi, this evil spirit would keep advertising to everybody at great volume, that is, the truth that Paul was a servant of the Most High God, much like the evil spirits did at times in Jesus' ministry, that they would mention him as the Son of the Most High God. But Paul here had the same response to Jesus in the Gospels. He didn't need, nor did he want, the testimony of an evil spirit to vindicate his ministry and mission. After all, this evil spirit, even though it was speaking the truth, did not release this girl from slavery to the evil one or slavery to her materialistic masters. So Jesus does again, but this time through Paul, what he did in the Gospels. and that is released this girl from slavery to the evil one. And we're told that the Spirit left her at once, just like Jesus did in the Gospels, releasing her from bondage, both to the evil one, but also to her greedy overlords. They could no longer exploit her anymore. She was free. Now, who would have thought that the vision of the Macedonian man would find immediate application in not a man, nor a Macedonian, but an Asian woman and an exploited slave girl? But that's what God chose to do in this mission. God often does what we don't expect him to do. But then there's a third person, a third individual in Acts 16 that is impacted by this Masso mission. And this time it is a man. But we're not sure whether he's a Macedonian man either. He's the Roman guard at the jail. He's the jailer. He's not a Jewish man, nor even a God-fearing man, but he's a pagan, a Gentile. We're told that Paul and Silas were thrown into the prison after the slave girl's master had a bit of a tantrum because their means of making money had now disappeared. You know, they cared more about short-term temporary wealth than they did in the eternal treasures of heaven that Paul and Silas were preaching to them. And so they had Paul and Silas beaten and thrown into prison, and so the roller coaster experience of Paul and his ministry continues. But whilst in prison, God again does something amazing. Just as he opened the heart of Lydia, just as he opened their minds back in Asia, now God is opening the doors of the prison. You know, he sends that earthquake and the prison doors open, the chains fall off. But rather than seeing that as a sign from, I would see that as a sign from God that he wants me to leave this place. The doors are swinging wide open. But Paul doesn't see it that way. He doesn't rush to just do what might be natural for us to do. Rather, he decides to stay in prison and just wait on the Lord and see what might happen. And we're told that somehow he managed to convince all the other prisoners in with him to stay. I don't know how he managed to do that, but he did. And then God does something even more amazing. The jailer, a hardened Roman soldier, likely the one that beat Paul just the day before, falls down, trembling before Paul, and says those famous words, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to be saved?" And at that point, I think Paul's decision to stay in prison and wait on the Lord was vindicated. Because here now is another gospel opportunity. Maybe he wasn't expecting it. Maybe he was. But he waited to see. And then there's this awesome gospel opportunity. Paul shares the gospel with this man, and we're told that he, along with his whole house, believed on Jesus and was saved. There are no stories in Acts 16 of mass European conversions. Just 3 individuals and their families. Nothing unlike the 3,000 or so that became Christians in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost and afterwards. But these 3 individual conversion stories become the launching pad for a new church on mainland Europe for the first time. And this church would grow day by day, individual by individual, such that Paul would later write a letter to the Philippians, sharing his great fondness for them and what God had begun in them. The big idea from Acts 16 is that a vision for the many starts with a mission to the one. A vision for the many starts with a mission to the one. Paul had a big vision for the nations, a vision that God himself had given him. But the many are always made up of one, of individuals. God is the majestic God over the whole universe, the many, but he cares about each and every single person. a wealthy businesswoman, an exploited slave girl, a Gentile jailer. They're all known and loved by God. A vision for the many starts with a mission to the one. Now, I recognise that has almost immediate application to those of us who follow Jesus and have a vision and mission for our church, and we'll get to the implications for us. But maybe you're not yet a follower of Jesus. Maybe you're tuning in online this morning. You've just stumbled across our Facebook page and you're listening to this message. Do you think that's an accident? Maybe you're here for the first time or back after a long while. Do you think it's an accident that you are here in the building or watching online today? I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident. It was no accident that Lydia happened to be in the right place at the right time to hear the gospel message. God planned it that way. Lydia's home was back in Asia, where Paul was prevented from going to preach the gospel. Why was Paul prevented from going there? I think it's because God had a plan for Lydia to be saved, and she wasn't in Asia at the time. She was in Philippi. So God closed that door and opened the next one, and there heard the good news of Jesus. Friends, I don't believe it's an accident that you are here or that you're watching online this morning. God brought you here today to hear his word. Maybe God is opening your heart today, just like he opened Lydia's heart. Maybe you can feel a weight on your soul this morning that God is doing something in there. Don't ignore that. Don't be like the slave girl's master. Don't care about temporary wealth and personal comfort over eternal treasures. If the Lord is working on your heart today, open it as he is opening it to you. And like Lydia, come to Christ. Follow him. And you'll have something more than just earthly treasure to rejoice in. Now, for those of us who are following Christ, as I said, the implications of this a vision for the many starts with a mission to the one is very clear to us. So what might that mean for us as individuals and as a church? Yes, we have a big vision like Paul had a big vision. Just because it's big doesn't mean that it can't be done. It can just start with one person. And that one person could be anybody, a person that you least expect. A wealthy businesswoman, an exploited slave, or a Gentile jailer. So who might God be calling you to go to? Can I encourage you to pray and open yourself up to where God might be leading you? There'll be some people, for whatever reason, like those in Asia at the beginning of the second missionary journey for Paul, who it's not their time to respond positively to the gospel. But there will be others that God can lead you to. Who might God be leading you today and in the days and weeks and months and years ahead? Pray that God might make it clear to you, that he might open doors like he did in Acts 16. And be ready, because it may not be the person you expect. It might be someone altogether different. And having prayed, have your eyes open to take that opportunity when it comes. In preparing for this message, I read a story during the week of a drug-using hippie who used to live in one of the open canyons outside Los Angeles on the west coast of the US. And one morning, a pastor and his wife prayed that God would direct their day and perhaps lead them to someone who needed to hear the good news of Jesus. And as the pastor was driving down one of the roads through the canyon outside Los Angeles, his muffler fell off his car, just like that. His muffler fell off his car right in front of this drug-using hippie's shack. Anyway, he went up to the door, not knowing who lived there, knocked on the door and asked if he could use their phone to call for help. And one thing led to another, and he led this man to Christ. Do you think God is often in the business of just randomly making mufflers fall off cars? Who knows? Who knows? Who has God been bringing along your path in recent times? Who have you started to have God conversations with that you wouldn't expect? Enjoy that. Take those opportunities. Who has God been bringing across our path as a church into some of our reach out ministries like Food Van and ESL and Playtime and Kids Club and Youth Group? Who has God been bringing, not by accident, to hear the good news of Jesus? I think sometimes we think our vision and mission can't be done, that it's too big, because we just don't have eyes to see what God is already doing amongst us. And if we just have our eyes open, we can be ready to take those opportunities when they come. When we have a big vision, we can all too easily lose the wood for the trees and say it can't be done. But don't tell me it can't, as FDR would say. It can be done. A vision for the men starts with a mission. And just imagine if we all believed it, and we all had just one conversation in the week ahead with one person. Imagine a church of 200, 250 people, each of us having one conversation with just one person. You could have an impact on another 250 people. Granted, they may not all come to Christ. It may not be their time just yet. You don't know. Can you imagine what might happen if we just believed a vision for the men?